Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilk some plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
That's what it is, yo. Reality is that to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road to reason.
Hey, welcome everyone to this week's edition of Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. I'm your host, Larry Mendoza, and with me I have the wonderful
Paul Sheehan, Radio Paul.
Radio Paul. Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. It's going to be an exciting show. We, as our guest, that'll come on a little later on. Her name is Dr. Karen Garst, and we will be discussing feminism and atheism and the intersection of both of these ideas and topics. And she has a brand new book called, I have it down here. Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. And we will be discussing a little bit about her book and what that's all about. And also give a little background on who Dr. Karen Garst is. She's a blogger, a feminist, an atheist, a writer. So it'll be an exciting conversation. But before we get into that, I believe we have a couple of announcements and some news items. So, Paul, why don't you hit us off with some announcement about I think Aaron Ra and
sure. Aaron Ra's got a new video up on his website where you can see a panel discussion with one of our hosts on our show and one of our fellow producers, Rob Penzak, and basically they're talking about the difference between firebrand atheism and diplomatic atheism. And there's some, I watched it, I actually felt it could have been a little more focused, but I also think it made some really good points, and I think our movement is at a place in this time where we really do need to start thinking about how we're going to branch out to communicate to people that are not atheists, people who are theists. I think that the video covers some really good points regarding these two types of philosophies. I think a big portion of this is who is your audience. Are you trying to appeal to the masses? Are you trying to appeal to an individual? They actually kind of do require different tactics. So that is something to give some thought and consideration to. And I highly recommend going to Aaron Ra's YouTube page and watching that. For no other reason than to plug Rob Penzak. But I think that they did a really great job having that discussion, and y'all should check that out.
Yeah, and just to add a quick thing to that, I think that the new atheist movement is what basically kicked off and popularizing atheism back in the early 2000s. After 9/11 is when, after that, it really kicked off with all the four horsemen: Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, the late Hitchens, and Dennett. Mm-hmm. And since then, though, the atheist movement has sort of gone through sort of a shift and a change, and it started incorporating a lot of other philosophy and ideologies and tactics and how to go about doing different things. But I think right now we're seeing a shift back to sort of new atheism, which is good. However, new atheism is sort of changing its rhetoric as well.
Are you saying that there's some sort of evolution here at work?
Well, evolution, it's a created thing. I don't know. But so, and one of the biggest changes that I've seen within the new atheist camp is Peter Boghossian and his idea of street epistemology. Yeah. And that's totally changed the way some atheists are having conversations about atheism and theism with Christians. And it's a much more, I guess you would say, docile approach, designed really to get people to think. So, I think activism requires a multifaceted approach. You need your lambs and you need your pit bulls and everything in between. So it's a good conversation. I'm glad it's still going on within the atheist community.
Yeah, it does, and it seems that it's taking this direction right now, that this is a time we need to really examine and develop these tools for each of those perspectives. So it's a good discussion.
Good. All right, so we'll move on to some news items. I will kick that off with something that's really been bugging me lately in the news. I'm not sure if everybody here has heard, but 3 men were arrested in Kansas for allegedly plotting a bombing of a building that held Somali Muslims in it. And basically, these 3 men, Curtis Allen, Gavin Wright, and Patrick Eugene Stein, are part of a group called the Crusaders, and they espouse anti-Muslim, anti-immigration, sovereign citizen, anti-government. You know, these are these type of extremists. You know, basically you're anti-government, anti-immigrant extremists. And what they wanted to do is start basically a religious war between Christians and Muslims in this country, allegedly, at least as from something what the FBI in questioning has found out. Now, I want to quote you something that one of these 3 men, Patrick Eugene Stein, said. Now, he said this, and I'll read this. He said that the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim, and that he would enjoy shooting Muslims' heads. When we go to operations, there's no leaving anyone behind, even if it's a 1-year-old. I'm serious. I guarantee if I go on a mission, those little effers are going bye-bye, he said, according to the FBI. Now, the thing that's bothering me on this is that the media and everyone else is refusing to call this Christian terrorism, but that's exactly what this is. Just because their skin is not brown and they're not from another country doesn't mean that they're not terrorists, the Christian type. And there are radical Christians in this country, and there's a lot more of these people. They just happen to get caught. But imagine if they would have gone forth with this bombing. You know, why? I don't hear much from the right on this, by the way. It's been pretty silent.
Well, this is, I was going to say, that's the one thing that bothers you.
Well, I mean, among other things.
But, I was going to say, and this is where, obviously I don't want to really kind of interject my own personal beliefs too much, but, I kind of got a background in like leftist politics and anti-imperialism and stuff like that. This is also kind of the thing, I think a lot of the left that's also been accused. There are people in the left that are completely giving a pass to Muslims, but I also think there's a lot of people in the left that have been very concerned about demonizing Muslims for this very reason. And I think that that's one of those things that we do need to be very careful about, because when we do not have rational discussions, it can lead people down that path of wanting to kill 1-year-olds.
Right.
So,
well, as I said, it's. This is horrible on many accounts. That the fact that we do have people in this country that are willing to blow up buildings, including kids, because of their hatred towards a certain type of people, whether it be race, or whether it be religion, or whether it be ideology, philosophy, whatever the case may be. The fact of the matter is, we need to call a spade, and this is terrorism, and it's homegrown terrorism, and we need to own up to that. And if we don't do that, then we have no leg to stand on when we criticize terrorism from other countries, So, anyways,
well, I just want to reinforce what you're saying, because terrorism is essentially committing acts of violence against civilian targets to further your political aims. The word gets thrown around all the time. It's become meaningless, but when you really kind of roll it back to what it actually was designated to when it was kind of first coined, then what you're describing is a pure act of terrorism. When you're targeting children, there's just, as you said, there's no other word for it. For the press to be terrified to use that word, my question is why? Is it because that they're worried that people will? I don't think that they're worried that people will turn on Christians, because I think they're worried that they will be labeled as anti-Christian, and that concerns me, that the press that's supposed to be a free press, that's supposed to report facts, is actually kind of burying them.
Yeah, and that's the big problem. It's like we need to have honest conversations, and that's again, it goes into this whole idea of thinking critically and rationally about things, as opposed to being afraid of offending or you know, saying something that someone might not like. Fact of the matter is, this is terrorism. I mean, by definition, the very textbook, as you mentioned, and it needs to be called as such in order to not trivialize, you know, this issue.
Well, I'm going to move on to my story because we're covering religions of peace. Like piece of your arm, piece of your eye. You know, they're all religions of peace. And the Hindu religion is itself one of these wonderful religions of peace. I want to read a news story today about an attack that took place in Mathura by Hinduvita activists on Friday.
And Mathura, just so that people know, is in India, correct?
It is in India. It's northern India. Basically, there was a meeting of atheists. It was a private meeting, but this is kind of the weird thing, that in India, even though it's a private meeting, and the Indian Constitution guarantees the rights of people to be non-religious and to hold meetings that are based around driving secular ideas. The Indian government shut down this private meeting because they were getting death threats, and God, it's like every time I cover one of these stories, there almost always seems to be like the government itself kind of seems to perpetuate the attitudes and the hysteria that give them the excuse to go in and shut it down. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that they don't have a separation of church and state officially in that country. I don't know. But, excuse me. But basically, some of the people showed up for this event, and they were attacked. They had their windows smashed out of their cars. People were carrying sticks, threatening to beat and kill them. And so the organizer basically said, you know, in conjunction with the government, we actually will not even accept people coming to the city. You know, the fact that you come here and somebody may recognize that you're a stranger, they may put 2 to 2 together and kill you. You know, this idea that I just get so sick when I see these coexist bumper stickers, because every one of these religions does the same thing, and it's getting worse all the time. Yeah,
and it's people don't really associate Hinduism with extreme violence, but if you know anything about world politics and geopolitics, there actually is a lot of clashes between Hindus and Muslims and Christians and so on and so forth. I guarantee you, atheists are not spared by this. I guarantee you, if you show me a religion, Larry, and we got to wrap in a second, I guarantee you I can find somewhere in its text something that's repressive and horrible that it propagates, and I can also find real life experiences that show that those things have actually taken place. And with that, we're going to actually go to a higher note, which is feminism on a positive side when we come back from our break, right? Yep, and we'll have a conversation with Karen Garst.
One of the goals of an atheist community is to provide support for those who find themselves without faith in light of mounting evidence against unfounded beliefs. Organizations with this goal range from skeptic groups to humanist service meetups to support groups for those who may have lost a community through their deconversion. In response to this, Recovering from Religion, an organization that seeks to support those who have left their faith, has recently launched the Hotline Project. This is not a deconversion hotline. The motive behind the project is to support a growing population of people who have left their faith and need to construct their identities around a new, beautiful reality. If you want more information, you can visit the Recovering from Religion website at recoveringfromreligion.org.
Good. Homemade noodles. Marty, stop it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It reminds me, I've been thinking maybe we should try a new form of birth control. I heard about this one, it's called the IUD, intrauterine device. Or we could try the patch on your arm. Actually, I think that one goes in your butt.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
What do you think, then? Arm of the butt.
There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably put the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Hey, welcome back everyone to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. Again, I'm your host, Larry Mendoza, and with me I have the wonderful...
Paul Sheehan, Radio Paul.
Radio Paul. So welcome back. We are going to have
Let me do that again. Radio Paul.
There we go. Anybody ever tell you have a voice or a look for radio?
I have a face for radio.
Face for radio?
There you go.
Is that how that works? Well, we are going to be joined by Dr. Karen Garst. She is a blogger, a writer, an atheist, a feminist. Recently has edited a book called Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. She is also a blogger on the webpage faithlessfeminist.com. So I urge everyone to go check that out and check out her book. So welcome on board, Karen Garst. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. Before we get started in the conversation about atheism and feminism and the intersection of the two, perhaps, can I get a little bit of background about you? What do you do? You got a PhD. What's your PhD in? What's your background here?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I went to school from kindergarten through PhD, got a little stuck there, and my PhD is in curriculum and instruction, and because I have a master's in French and I speak French fluently, my major advisor wanted me to do a dissertation on Pierre Bourdieu, who is a sociologist of education French. He has since passed away, and the topic was cultural reproduction. So I think it's interesting. I never went into academia, but here we are 40 years later talking about how does culture reproduce itself through religion. So it's kind of interesting. I held various positions in my career. I retired as executive director of the Oregon State Bar. I also worked previously for a union and was the director of the Community College Association. So a pretty good variety.
Yeah. It's interesting how things kind of come back around, loop around in life, huh? Yeah. And you know, you're a feminist and an atheist. Were you always both, or did you come from a religious background and you kind of maybe found feminism through that, or how did you come together to be where you are today, philosophically speaking?
Well, I was raised in Bismarck, North Dakota, so you can guess which religion that was. Your chances of saying Lutheran are pretty high. So I was raised as a Lutheran. Everybody I knew went to church. There was a small synagogue, but pretty much everyone was Protestant or Catholic. I attended a Lutheran college, Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, and maybe we can insert later on some of the things I learned there that I had never heard from the pulpit, so that was interesting. And then I went to graduate school. I never really went to church. Church to me was family and community, and none of my friends went. But after I got married, we were participating in a church, New Thought, kind of spiritual church, and that kind of went belly up and we never went back. And during that time, I was reading a lot of the books of the Jesus Seminar.
Right.
And one of the things that I held on to, well, if Jesus wasn't resurrected, then the whole thing is debunked.
Right.
And I read Bishop John Shelby Spong's book, Resurrection, Myth or Reality, and convinced me it never happened, and it was a couple decades ago, and I've been an atheist ever since.
Oh, wow.
In terms of feminism, I was in college in the late 60s, 70s, when a lot of the second wave feminism was happening, and that's where I really got my education about that.
Awesome. So you've recently edited a book, and it sort of discusses, I guess, atheism, but it's from a feminist perspective, I would imagine. And it's about a number of women, I think it's 18 women that you were able to get to write some essays for this book. Why do you think that it's important to discuss feminism and atheism in relation to each other, and why you wrote this book? If you can give us a little background on that.
Well, I was, when my husband and I quit going to church, we never joined any humanist groups, atheist groups, anything like that. We just slept in on Sundays and raised our son secular. But then in 2014, the United States Supreme Court issued a decision in Burwell v. Hobby Lobby. Now, if you remember, the Citizens United decision says that a corporation could be considered a person and then had a right to contribute to campaigns, which is why we have all this money in politics.
Right.
And so understanding that, when the Hobby Lobby decision came down, they had already said that a corporation was a person. Well, this Hobby Lobby is a craft store, and they said they did not want to provide certain forms of birth control to their employees under the Affordable Care Act because of their religious views.
Right.
And the court, 5 Catholic men who supported the decision, 5-4 decision, said, oh yeah, that's right, you don't have to do it. And I happened to be having lunch with a friend of mine who is a novelist, and she said, you should write a book. And I said, well, the only thing I can get excited about is atheism. Because I thought, it was 2014. We're still fighting about women's reproductive rights. Give me a break. I mean, I went to school in the college in the late 60s, and our student newspaper put an ad for an abortion clinic in New York because that was the only place it was illegal, and they impounded all the newspapers. Oh, wow. So I remember the time before, and we don't want to go back there. Where somebody is in high school, I remember, takes this long airplane ride somewhere, probably in New York, in hush-hush. Nobody said anything about it. We need to have women in control of their bodies. We need to have safe, affordable, accessible abortion. We need to have constant research about new forms of birth control, both male and female. And so that's why I became involved. And I decided to focus on women primarily because of that decision. I put together 22 women from all different walks of life, all different ages. They were either raised secular or from a Judeo-Christian background.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
And they tell their stories of why they left religion. And I think it's very powerful to have personal stories because we all look to models. If you don't ever see a female astronaut, do you think, gee, I can be an astronaut? It's like that little boy, African-American boy who looked up at President Obama, got to meet President Obama. He's going to think, wow, I can be anything. So I think it's important to provide models, and this book provides women with a series of stories that they can say, if they can do it, I can do it too, or she had it harder than me, my case is different, but gives them information of how to do it.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Larry and I were talking before the show. We were talking about the different types of feminism that exist, and there seems to be some people that their answer for everything is that you're a male pig and this kind of thing. And we were talking about, like, the type of feminists that I actually kind of associate with are the women who have made it, that do take younger women under their wings and teach them how to become leaders and successful business people. There really is a difference in our community right now of what appear to be different camps of feminism. I know we have the whole first, second wave, but there's also the way that people think and how they relate. For instance, one of the things I've always came from, to this movement, understanding the repression of women from a religious perspective. There does seem to be some women who've kind of aren't necessarily so much on the religious angle, but they kind of just inserted themselves in the atheist community to push other agendas. And yet they'll be the very ones that will defend Muslims, which I don't understand, and I don't get that. And I'm kind of wondering, as someone who's looked at these issues over time, what type of trends do you think are currently taking place that are positive for feminists? Because we can all go on all day long about like bad elements, but what's being done right now in the atheist community that is making a real positive change for women?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. Obviously, when you group a set of people together, whether they're women or whether they're atheists, you're going to have a wide variety of views. You're never going to have one coherent definition that encapsulates everybody. That's just the way it is. But from my experience, getting involved in this a couple of years ago, I have found the atheist community very welcoming to me as a woman, to me as a writer, as a blogger, etc. And I've just made a tremendous number of friends. I did have the opportunity to attend Road to Reason, and I thought the mix of speakers was I'm sorry, not Road to Reason, the Reason Rally.
Oh. We were at Reason Rally, by the way.
Yeah, right. Okay, got that wrong. Anyway, and I thought there was a great mix of speakers at the convention that followed and at the rally itself. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the Women in Secularism 4 conference in Arlington, and I thought that was an excellent opportunity to explore views that might be particular to women. It was fascinating. Met a lot of people, a lot of different views, a lot of disagreements, even within that group. So I think that as a whole, there's a variety of viewpoints within that, but I felt very welcomed as a woman.
Good. I want to say that your book and the blogging site Feminist Atheist that you put together, and I guess as a continuation for the discussion of your book, if I'm mistaken, it sounds like though that this is what I feel, anyways, that true feminism is supposed to be, as you said, setting up role models, setting up women and their success stories, or at least their stories about how they moved from dogmatism to, say, reason. And this to me is in vast contrast with a lot of the feminist rhetoric that I've been hearing, which is just nothing but angry rhetoric. And so thank you, by the way, for putting together a book that it doesn't sound like it's just espousing the philosophy of feminism, but it actually is putting feminism to work. This is what feminism is about. So I think that's a wonderful thing that you're doing.
I also want to thank you for that, because quite frankly, I think that there are just too many angry voices that don't seem to have direction. And so far, from what I can see, you're actually addressing real issues and providing some solutions, or at least thoughts on solutions. And that is just something that is horribly underrepresented right now. Right. I think that we need more people to look at this logically. So
yeah, and again, feminism is an important topic. Even in our presidential election right now, it's almost the first time in history where a woman, first of all, that's historical in and of itself, but happens to be running against someone who is an obvious misogynist. It's unbelievable that in 2016 we are seeing this contrast in two.
But then in contrast, she says that a 12-year-old girl brought it on herself. So,
regardless, though,
I don't know that she's as great of a champion for women's rights.
Well, but it's just
they're all bad.
It's still though. It's almost like you couldn't have set this up any better. But
I'm selling pay-per-view tickets to the next debate. So,
but anyway, so let me ask one question. So, as far as feminism, what would be if you were to define feminism in a couple of sentences or in a short paragraph, what would be feminism to you?
Well, to me, feminism is gender equality.
Okay.
And I was very surprised when I got involved in this effort how that word has changed. And I do think we need to distinguish between women who are out there working, caring for children, whatever they do, if you ask them, please define feminism, they're going to say equal rights, because I've been doing this lately. I was at the dentist the other day and I asked the two women in the office, how would you define feminism? And they said, well, I'm supposed to stand up for myself. I stand up for women's rights, gender equality. But if you look at social media, you have a whole different perception, and there's a much wider array of definitions and groups of people. So, the vast majority of people, I think, you ask would still define feminism as gender equality. But there are certainly pushback against that word because of some radical feminists who even go to the point of being anti-feminists or men's rights activists.
Which is really interesting, that you would have feminists kind of come back around. It's so radical that it's almost like, it's almost like politics. The left and right-wing paradigm, to me, is not so much a straight line as it is more of a loop, and if you get radicals on both sides, they sort of start meeting somewhere at the top. And I've sort of been seeing that also with the feminist movement, and to the point where some of this feminist it's like, I like to call it dogmatic feminism. It's almost where you have to defend an idea no matter how irrational it is, only because somebody said it's a feminist idea, even if it turns out not to be so feminist.
Well, I know Larry and I were talking before the show. We were talking about, where repression of women comes from, the patriarchy. I am of the opinion, whether you agree with it or not, I'm not sure, that the patriarchy does not exist, at least in its historical context. But it comes from religion, that religions kind of propagated patriarchy, and politicians would latch onto that. Now, that is not to say that women don't still suffer as a result of what I will call inheritance, that there becomes a generational deficit in, say, certain educational fields, certain employment fields, certain kind of attitudes that women have about being empowered in politics, etc. And I'm wondering what you see as real concerns facing women today versus, while it may be inappropriate to call someone sugar or hun, I think we can all agree that there are issues that women in this country certainly are more pressing. What do you see that really needs to be addressed?
Well, first of all, I think we've come a long way. My mother went to college in the 30s, and her father, she wanted to be an artist, and her father said, you'll be a teacher, and that's the way it was. When I grew up and decided I wanted to be a teacher, which I was for 7 years, that to me was an issue of models. I could have been something else, but it never occurred to me. I love science. It never occurred to me to be a scientist. To today, whether I think women have a lot more opportunities. The veterinarian, if you go to, we took our dog to an emergency vet the other day, and the woman was talking, half the students in veterinary school are women. Half the law schools are women. So there's a lot more opportunity for women today. Now, there are still issues, as we can see in the current election. It really is amazing to me. I can't believe I lived long enough to see something this bizarre in a U.S. presidential election.
Kind of makes me want to hurry up and die.
Patriarchy really comes from property. I do a presentation called From Goddess to God, Elimination of the Feminine Divine. And there's actually, if you sign up for my blog at www.faithlessfeminist.com, there's a paper you get, a little ebook you get for free. And it really, it all started out with property, because somebody's going to own property, and then, you want to give it to your son, and therefore you need to have, your wife needs to be a virgin, so the son is really yours, and there can't be adultery, for women at least, etc., and that follows through. I think the other issue is culture changes slowly in some aspects, and in terms of economic equality, if you in the, let's say, 19th century, your family was the Rockefellers. Well, guess what? that carries down generation for generation. So it's going to take a while for women in those fields to accumulate wealth like men have, to break into different fields, to be head of Fortune 500 companies, et cetera. So I think we're moving forward on that one. I think the current debate and some of the things Donald Trump has said have certainly put us backward. But I do think, I want to say one more thing. When I was in college, I applied for a scholarship to Dartmouth, and this was 1973, and the woman on the committee said, why should we give it to you? Well, you'll just get married and have kids. I didn't get the scholarship. I went to the UW-Madison instead. Wow. But I think that would be challenged today. People wouldn't put up with that.
No, absolutely not. I think, especially on college campuses and with college, there's a lot of the younger generation is certainly not going to put up with something like that anymore. So yeah, I think we have been seeing progress. But as such, even within the feminist community, we're seeing a lot of good things that came out of feminist activism. Do you feel that there are certain tactics within the feminist community today that sort of can bring us back? And I know you've already alluded to this as far as some of these feminists are just not quite getting it insofar as that. So where do you think, how do we get these, I guess you would call dogmatic feminists or new feminists, how can we get them to change how they really look at feminism and go from more of this angry and almost like man-hating and to back towards a more rational discourse? What do you think we need to do?
Well, yeah, I don't think you're ever going to be able to change everybody. I was, when I do my blog post, I posted to various atheist Facebook groups, and a friend and I had done a post about we need more secular men, just to vary the topic a little, and we posted it. And, I try to respond to comments and get online, etc. And there was a group called No Gods, No Masters, which is from Margaret Sanger in the early 20th century, atheist feminists. And they were starting to talk about this post in kind of talking about it in the third person. Oh, is she serious? I can't believe she is serious. Yeah. And so I got online and I started to chat, and they were very anti-men and couldn't believe that I had written this post, how ridiculous it was. And I said, well, look, let's go back and look at the 19th century. Let's look at the suffragist movement. Yes, there were women involved in that, but there were men involved in it too. And men voted to support the 19th Amendment. And they absolutely ridiculed me. They said, oh, what does she want to do? Make them cake? Wow. And in about 5 minutes, I got kicked off the site, banned from the group, etc.
From a feminist group.
To me, that is just, it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, I'm married to a man. I have a son. Right. Men are part of our lives. Why would you want to do that? But there are always going to be fringe groups. That's just the way it is. And I think that we need to have women atheists speak up more, and that's why I wrote the book. We need to have our voices heard. We need to step up and be on panels and do debates, etc.
No, I totally agree. I can't believe you got kicked out of a feminist group. That's, I could see me getting kicked out of a feminist group, but certainly not another feminist.
Definitely me. But no, I mean, it's one of those things where, I obviously don't ever like to tell people how they should speak or think or behave.
Sure.
But I'm almost wondering if it would do women who consider themselves sex-positive feminists or progressive feminists start looking at like a code of conduct that they want to publicly promote. Like, for instance, there was a guy that worked for NASA, and he was wearing some type of a shirt of a woman in a bikini or something. Yeah,
like one of those old. Yeah, I remember what you're talking about.
These women went after him, and basically, I think he got fired, or I know he broke down crying, and I just don't know how this helps women. I actually care about human beings, regardless of their gender or racial makeup, or I'll say racial ethnicity, because we're all one race. But if there's a real problem, I want to know the facts. I want to know the evidence. I want the data so I can start tackling the problem. And going after someone because of of a shirt that they wear, or because they use a particular word you don't like and trying to destroy their life, I think is so counterproductive that it actually has hurt the name feminism. Yeah. And have you run into any type of say men, for instance, that would maybe otherwise be receptive to the actual ideas that you promote, but because you've used the word feminist, like, does it shut down a discussion with them? Have you experienced anything like that?
Oh, Paul, that's an excellent question. When I got involved in this project, you just can't write a book. You have to have a blog. You have to be on Facebook and YouTube and all of those kind of things. So I hired a marketing guy. And when we were talking about a name, the first thing he suggested was Godless Grandmother. And I said, let's not try to emphasize how old I am, okay? Keep working on it. And he came up with Faithless Feminist. I thought, well, God, I'm a feminist. That's a great idea. And I had no idea of the pushback. But here's my strategy. I try to respond, as I said earlier, to comments on my blog or comments when I post something on Facebook. And I always start out with the idea, I can educate this person. Mm-hmm. So usually when I get somebody, usually men, but it could be women too, who object to it, who haven't even read the post, I usually start out by saying, well, did you have a chance to read the post? And then if they say something really kind of, offensive, I start out by saying, what would your mother say if she saw that you'd written that? Just to kind of take it down a tone. And then I go back and forth with them. Well, here's what feminism means to me. It means gender equality. And here's why I think that. And, a lot of times people totally come around and they'll say, oh, well, yeah, okay, I get it. I support you. Thanks for doing the blog. Right. Now, that doesn't always happen, but I think you have to engage in conversation. And if somebody's saying something offensive to me, I'm going to engage in conversation. Mm-hmm. If I'm walking down the street, now this does not happen to me anymore, and if they did, I'd probably like it, but I don't get catcalls. At 66, you're done with that. But I would stop and say something. Right. I would say, how would you like it if you were walking down the street and you were with a business partner and somebody said, hey, you got nice balls. Come on, let's put it in context.
If you're asking me.
Like that. Or maybe, maybe.
Anyway, I think
you have to engage in conversation. Yeah. And what is offensive to one person is not offensive to the other. Right. We're building a new house, and the contractor is about our age, and we've made great friends, and he calls me the broad. And to me, it's kind of funny. Right. And my real estate agent said, oh, God, aren't you offended by that? And I said, no, and if I were, I'd say something. So we've got names for him too.
Exactly.
And you got to look at the context. And if something offends you, say something about it. Don't go on Facebook and rant and rave about it. Do something about it. Be an activist.
And you make a very excellent point here, because you make a couple excellent points. But number one, just because you are offended doesn't mean you're being oppressed, and that's, I think, a distinction that people they conflate these two issues. But just because something is offensive doesn't mean people lose the right to say it. Now, I'm not talking about people having catcalling or whatever, but on a more broader sense. That's what reminded me when you said that, and I think. Going back to the feminist, these I guess new age or new feminists or whatever you want to call them today, I think a lot of is it third wave? Is that? I think a lot of it comes from this melding of feminist ideas with general social justice warrior ideas. Now, not that social justice is bad or that I'm against it, but we're seeing some of these tactics from the social justice community that almost are becoming very intolerant in and of themselves. And I think that's maybe where we're seeing this idea that you can't even say anything that might potentially, probably, maybe be offensive to somebody, who knows, but just because we don't want to be that, you can't say it anymore. And we're seeing this especially within anti-Muslim or anti-Islam in the communities, or speakers that want to come to a university to give a talk and they get banned or get deplatformed or whatever the case. But To bring out also another point, I think a lot of this also stems from the fact that, again, and I mentioned this earlier, but there are some women's studies courses that are kind of teaching this intolerant type of feminism. And one of the examples that I have is that a friend of mine who took a women's studies course at a university, which I won't mention, but they were talking about how feminism is a theory and lesbianism is the practice. And when she, totally crazy. And when she questioned that as, like, what do you mean? They basically shunned her and called her an agent of the patriarchy. I mean, we're talking very fringe type of stuff here, but it's being taught on a college campus. And this is not only from the students, but from the teacher, the professor as well. Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of, and I think that's part of where we're maybe seeing some of this intolerance.
I think it's important. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that there is an institutionalization of some of our universities with some very toxic ideas about feminism. But you seem, in your book, to have given somewhat of a response to that by the very types of women that you've interviewed. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of the women that you've interviewed and some of the revelations, really powerful stuff that kind of registered with you as you were having them do these essays.
Well, I was really amazed at how I could get women, that women were willing to come forth, they were willing to tell their stories. And I was raised, Lutheran. It wasn't oppressive. I still think it would be really interesting to study the impact on women or young girls of praying to a male figure every night. Well, what's the impact of that? You don't see any female divine, just male. But some of these women were raised in very abusive religions. Maybe I should just read a little excerpt from one of them.
That would be great.
And it's the first one in the book, and she was raised as a fundamentalist Christian. The problem is my mind, my heart, and my will were the fundamental tools I needed for knowing myself, for connecting with other humans, for making wise choices, for having empathy and showing compassion, for setting clear boundaries, for living a whole and satisfying life. But when my religion demanded that I believe things that were irrational, mythical, or contrary to human decency, it had to undermine or destroy these fundamental tools. What else would they have done? If they hadn't bent my mind, I might have wondered why there are such an amazing number of things in the Bible that make no sense. If they hadn't suppressed my feelings, I might have decided that human compassion is more important than obedience to dogma. And I might have rebelled at being commanded to love a being who sent billions of people to hell. And this woman, it's really fascinating, her story about she was taught not only does she commit sin, but because she's a woman, she is sin.
Right.
And she talked about what it took to let go of that. I mean, that shaped her whole psyche. The good news to the story is she did get out of religion, and she emailed me a few weeks ago and said that she was on the beach at the Oregon coast and had an epiphany. She felt serene for the first time. She felt good about herself. Yeah. So I think religion, particularly for women, can be very, very damaging.
Yeah, and particularly for women. I do agree. I mean, the very notion, I grew up Catholic, and I grew up in Italy, in Sicily, and Catholicism, they focus a lot on like the Virgin Mary and the saints and things like that. But I think the very concept of even the Virgin Mary is essentially misogynistic. By the very nature of what that even is supposed to
She's
represent.
A rape victim who was grateful that she was impregnated.
And so this idea that, and then of course, within the Bible, the woman was the one that got seduced by, Satan to eat the fruit of, the forbidden fruit of knowledge, and so it's always the woman's fault, and it's sort of, anti-woman rhetoric is just just peppered all throughout the Bible.
Well, and the Bible has a pecking order. It's women have a place in it, and it is always subservient to a man. So.
Always subservient. So but let me ask you this about your book. So, how hard was it to find these women that are willing to be so candid about their experience? Because I can't imagine it's an easy thing to talk about, especially because a lot of them come from a very abusive background with religion. So was it easy? Did you have a lot of, was it hard to find women, or did you find the opposite, that women were very happy to discuss?
Well, you know, you start out with a passion and anger, and you know, I didn't do it in the most organized fashion. But I started out reaching to friends, and some said, I'm an atheist, but I don't care to write about it. And you know, I know pretty much who's an atheist, who's not, and some of my friends said, yeah, you know, I'd love to do that. And then I started to go to humanist groups, went to the Humanist of Greater Portland. I went to a women's book study as part of that, and got a couple authors there. Center for Inquiry. So I reached out in my area to those groups, and then to have a little more diversity, I reached out through social media and got people who said, yeah, I'd really like to do that. A woman was born in Zimbabwe, lives in the United States. A woman was born in Peru. So you have more of a variety. I didn't do it real systematically. I want one of this, one of that, two of that, three of that. But I think I ended up with a really good variety. And I applaud all these women for coming forth and telling their stories. Now, I will tell you, some of them are writing under pseudonyms, because there are some of these religions that if you admitted you were an atheist, your family could have nothing to do with you ever again.
Which is tragic and sad. But do you have another excerpt you would like to read from your book? Because I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think it's wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let me set this one up. This is a woman who was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and of course you're not supposed to be with somebody who's not a Jehovah's Witness. You're not supposed to have sex till marriage, etc. Well, she gets on a college campus, falls in love. He's not a Jehovah's Witness, and she sleeps with him, and kind of kept it from everyone. Well, one of her friends turns her in to the church, and so she gets called before this tribunal of 3 men, elders of the church, and here's what they say and her reaction. You must consider him a tool of Satan. My face refused to remain neutral as my ears took in this sentence. Did I hear him right? With an expression of incredulity and confusion, I looked back at the elder who had just spoken and the 2 others on the panel with him and replied, I don't see how that's possible. I don't think you understand. That was cute. I love him. This isn't just a crutch. I love him. I wouldn't be with just anybody. Jehovah is a God of love, and this is love. So I don't see how that is even remotely connected to Satan. And another elder chimed in, Satan is using him to draw you away from Jehovah and is disguising himself as this boy. Oh, silly seal. You hadn't realized that you'd fallen in love with the devil. Well, what is interesting is the story has a happy ending. She married him and has 2 lovely children. Her immediate family knows, but that's why she went under a pseudonym. So the rest of her family doesn't. And she found out later that one of those 3 men who was married was having an affair with his sister-in-law at the time he was interrogating her about falling in love with a boy. Yeah, we hear about these types of stories all the time where, these people that are holier than thou and judging you or judging women or judging whatever while they're then having, their affairs. Unfortunately, we do hear a lot.
That's the advantage of being chosen by God. You're exempt from these things,
You don't have to practice what you preach, I suppose. But that's interesting. Yeah, well, I'm glad that she was able to push past that harassment at the church.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
What do you think, because we only have a few minutes left, but what do you think is the primary lesson you would like anyone reading your book to take away from it? Like, what do you expect it to change in their life after having read it?
I think the book is primarily for people who are on the fence and they have some doubts about religion, and this book gives them a whole set of scientific reasons, critical thinking, mythology, etc., a lot of different ways to approach why religion is indeed a myth. And I think it allows them to, again, see a model that they can do it too.
Can you fix your microphone a little bit? You kind of started sounding a little bit, there you go. There you go. Maybe that'll...
Is that better?
Not really.
Okay, well, that's okay. Don't worry about it. That's all right.
Okay.
All right, that's
Oh, there we
better.
go.
That's
Now
the
we-
ticket.
Okay. So that they can see a model, as I said earlier, that they can do it too. And if you have a friend who's, kind of questioning religion and you're an atheist, maybe you'd like to say, why don't you read this book? I had the fortune of being on Recovering from Religion's resource list. They have my book pictured there. And I think that would be a really a good resource for people.
Yeah, I also noticed that at least one, if not more, of the women that wrote the essay were from a secular background. Was that done on purpose, or was that just by chance somebody wanted to talk about their story, and why? What was that? The story behind someone from a secular background wanting to write about this?
Well, as I reached out to people, one of those writers is a really good friend of mine, and she has to tell the funny story. They moved here from England, and in England, when you're lost, they tell you from the pub, go to the Lucky Lab and turn right. And when she got to the United States, I always say, turn to the Methodist Church. She goes, I don't know where the Methodist Church is. So I think it's interesting to see perspectives of people who weren't raised in that religion and what their views were, and particularly what happened when they moved to the United States, how different it was. It shows you a contrast, if you will. So I think it's helpful to have that in there and to show people there are countries where the majority of people are secular.
Right. Oh, and you're absolutely right. And I think we most people in this country, depending on where you are from this country, don't even know that there's an area outside of the U.S. Much less that there are many secular countries out there. So I thought that was an interesting perspective too that you put in your book. And we have a couple minutes left, but do the women in your book, would they consider themselves feminists?
That's an excellent question. One does not. And Sylvia Benner wrote, and so if you want to look at that one, you can go to hers. And she comes from Europe, and I think she sees issues in the United States that need addressing. I mean, the number of men who are in prison, etc. And I think all those issues are legitimate. When I say gender equality, to me it doesn't mean just focusing on women. It's focusing on the whole system. And there's certainly going to be issues where intervention and different policies need to be made that affect men. I mean, look at the military. Couldn't men say, why am I the only one who gets drafted?
Right.
Why aren't women drafted? Why don't so there's issues like that that I think need to be addressed. But I would say most of the other women would probably say they were feminists.
I guess real quick, and I don't know if we have much time, we literally have a minute, but there's this thing when we talk about gender equality, but we also have to acknowledge, I think, gender differences, which is, say, for instance, a man is never going to breastfeed a child in public, or that there are men are more prone to getting prostate cancer. I mean, there are these things that go on in each gender that are also unique to that gender. And I guess, are we at least open to the idea that gender equality means also respecting the individual needs of the other gender?
And you have about 20 seconds to reply.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, I want to...
Brilliant.
That's it. Now, and I mean, that's the idea behind the word gender equality, is to understand the equality of both genders, and that there are also basic differences, but that's the idea about critically thinking about this whole idea beside, without falling into this, I'm a feminist, I'm not a feminist camp. I mean, I think this is exactly where feminism should go, is exactly what you're doing in promoting women and promoting the goodness of women. But I want to thank you for coming on our show. We have run out of time. You've been wonderful. We can have you back on the show, hopefully. I want everybody to check out Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion, and faithlessfeminist.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.